Okay, so I am technically supposed to be sleeping right now because I work in a couple hours. But like I was up all night scrolling through Reddit and thinking about stuff because there's just been this thing that's like been on my brain for like the last, I don't know, like month or two. I don't know if anyone feels the same way I do, but I've kind of just been so frustrated lately because I feel like kind of my whole life I've thought to myself like it would be better if we did this or we did that. I'm talking in more like a broad general sense, you know, like looking at politics in the world and community planning. And I think to myself, well, why don't we do those things? But it kind of stops there, you know? And I feel like I've been sort of waiting for somebody to fix those things, just hoping and praying and waiting. And I'm constantly disappointed. Like I got so annoyed. I was reading this thing. Somebody was talking about how Conservative Party of Canada in their policy, I think it's section 17, there are these two things that they've decided are really good ideas. So the first one is they want to make it so that they can introduce non-union members into a union. For me growing up in Canada where it's very conservative, I was told my entire life that like unions are bad and evil and they keep lazy people from having to do real work. As an adult, I've seen that as so far from true. Like I look at the poor fucking teachers unions, how they can't even get a livable wage for themselves. They're fighting for a basic shit like being allowed to have health care or being allowed to provide actual school supplies to their students instead of just relying on the good graces of parents to donate shit to the school all the time. And I think like, holy shit, unions are so fucking weak. They have to fight so hard for such a little scrap of basic human decency. Like, it's such a low fucking bar. So to me, to look at that and to see that conservatives think, you know what we need right now in this economy? We need to make trade negotiations worse for unions. So people can be a part of the teachers union and not actually participate when there's a strike. So that we can just fuck over all the teachers in BC who want things like actual wages. How dare they? There's another thing, I think, kind of in the same section where they were talking about how they want to move public servants to a pension where it's just like a defined limit. Which, like, at first I had to think about this. I was like, maybe that's not bad. But then I thought about it some more, and I was like, imagine, okay, you've been working 30, 40 years in a career. Every single year, money that you earned from your salary goes into a pension that is supposed to help you in retirement. And honestly, like, I don't even have RRSP because I've been so broke, I just haven't put any money away. I may never retire because I just simply do not have enough money at the end of the year to put away anywhere. So I think like you've worked 30, 40 years as a public servant, which means you're in a government position. You've been putting money into this fucking pension. And one day, Pierre Poilievre gets into government, he's like, hey, so remember how you put away all that money and you worked really hard and you earned that? And we said, oh, no, don't worry, we'll take care of it. We're not going to give it to you. What we're going to do is we're going to make it so everyone gets the same amount of pension, even if you personally made more money. And sucks to suck. Hope you can retire on that because you don't get the money you earned. Crazy fucked up to me. But it's like that everywhere. Every party. They're doing weird shit. Like conservatives, I know I'm picking on them first, but that's just because, like, oh my god, with the Loblaws boycott. Then I find out that they have fucking lobbyists in their cabinet. And I'm like, how is that even allowed? Why as a country did we think it was okay to allow politicians who make sweeping changes to our policy where we're like, you know what we want? We want to have lobbyists in there who can use all this money and influence to do things that are bad for people that live here. And it drives me nuts. With the Loblaws boycott, I don't know if anyone was following that. I was fascinated. I learned about it very late. And the whole reason I was fascinated by it is I was so impressed. It basically started that a bunch of people started taking pictures in the grocery store and they were like, hey, isn't it super weird that this 500-gram bag of food is only like 250 grams when I weigh it on an actual scale? Hey, isn't it weird that when I go to a Loblaws grocery store, this yogurt is $30 and in a completely different grocery store right down the street, the exact same container of yogurt is $6? That's crazy. And people started sharing all these pictures and they were like, oh my god, we're getting fucked over. So these wonderful people, these wonderful smart Canadians got together, and this is like one of the first times I've seen Canadians in a very long time do something together. Very divided. All these people, okay, it didn't matter what political party you ascribed to, didn't matter what your philosophy was, everyone was mad because we all want to pay good prices for groceries. So they all got together and they're like, you know what? Fuck Loblaws. We're just not going to shop there anymore. And it was insane. Okay, like somehow this fucking subreddit of just angry Canadians managed to like completely clear out whole grocery stores to the point where like Loblaws had to start firing people and discounting stuff stuff like crazy and trying to give people shitty coupons. Like, it worked. They actually had a significant amount of power when they all worked together. The person who was in charge of this boycott, they even were personally like invited to have a discussion with the PR person for Loblaws, because they were like, hey, what would it take for you to stop doing the boycott? We're not worried or anything, but like, hypothetically, if you were going to end it, what would you do? And they didn't get everything they wanted. And one of the things that really disappointed me, basically what happened is, one of the things that they really wanted is they wanted there to be like a standardized rule that grocery stores could not overinflate their prices by saying like, oh, we're just in a period of inflation, so now yogurt has to be $30. Especially when it's pretty clear by looking at other independent grocery stores that that was not true, and they definitely didn't need to charge things that high. But what happened is this fucking petition goes to the House of Commons, and members in every single party voted against it. Like, it wasn't just conservatives, some people in NDP, some people in the Liberals. And I look at that and I think, how can all of you say, I care about grocery prices, I care about making life easier on Canadians, and you can't even fucking institute something basic like groceries cannot scalp people for money? You know, like that pisses me off. And I think, like, why? And yeah, I've been thinking to myself so much lately, like, well, why don't you do something about it? Why don't you try doing something different? So I've messaged MPs, I've messaged MLAs. Some of them have been nicer than others. Honestly, the closer you get to local government, the more helpful those people seem to be. But as soon as you get to MPs like John Barlow, he's the guy in my region, I went through his pamphlet. I read every single fucking thing in his pamphlet, and I made notes about it, and I had questions for him, because there's a lot of stuff in there that I was like, I'm not sure about this. You know, I look at your claims about the safe injection site, and I haven't seen anything like that, and it also doesn't really make sense, because we just introduced them 3 years ago, so it's kind of weird you're saying it's a failure. Most addicts don't get off of drugs after just 3 years. That's honestly just like not how addiction works. It's like no one's ever seen a 12-step program. So like, I look at these things and I ask all these questions, and I'm emailing people. There's a committee that is supposed to be dedicated to removing barriers. It's called the Accessible Canada Act. Their whole job, this committee's whole fucking job, is to remove accessibility barriers for people with disabilities so they can contribute more to Canada and the world and the government and being a citizen, basically. I get onto the website, I dig deep into all these fucking menus, and I'm looking at it, and one of the only ways you can contact them as like a regular person is by submitting a brief. Okay, a brief is like 5 to 10 pages, formatted with research. You have to like outline all of your points and things, which is weird, because if you are a disabled person, I feel like you should be able to say, hey, I am a disabled person, these are my experiences, and this is why they matter. Because I personally live with and have worked with an autistic person for 6 years. So I am kind of aware of what that looks like. I'm very intimately familiar with the challenges they've faced going to university, accessing jobs, accessing social services. I have a family member who has a severe learning disability, and I've seen how much they struggle and how difficult it is for them to access basic social services that they are entitled to because of how the fucking government is set up. It is not ideal for people with learning disabilities to be reading through all these crazy forums and drilling down through all these websites. So I had to write up a whole fucking brief and support it with research. And lo and behold, I find that these are topics people have actually spent lots of time researching. It's not like I'm bringing something new to the table. So I submit this whole fucking brief, and then I go and I watch one of the committee talks. One of the things I learned is if you go to our Commons, the Canadian website, they have transcripts for all the parliamentary processions. They have information on some of the meetings that the different committees are doing right now that you can go and you can watch. So I go watch one, and there's this fantastic speaker. I can't remember his name right now, David something. He's kind of a legal person. And they had a lot of speakers that were talking about disabilities of various different kinds. There was a guy who wanted to make some kind of a biking route across Canada that would make it easier for people with disabilities to access, because one of his points was like, a lot of disabled people that are like physically disabled just don't go places. So people aren't even aware that their businesses are inaccessible, because disabled people just like don't participate in society because they know there will not be things that are accessible to them. And there was so much stuff like that where the speakers were talking about things that are like so obvious if you've touched grass in the last 10 years. But this one speaker specifically, he was talking to the committee members, and he was like, I haven't seen a single time that you have actually removed a barrier in the like 5 years you've been active as a committee, and I don't understand how that's possible. And the lady that was in charge of asking him questions at the committee, all she could come up with was, Well, at one of the last meetings, we had someone who's disabled who couldn't speak to us because there is an issue with the software program, so we learned that was a problem. And I look at that and I'm like, how? How do you get here? That, like, the government structure is so inefficient that the only way normal citizens can access things that they need to tell you what is wrong and what they need is writing crazy fucking letters and, like, CCing random fucking ministers of justice in the hopes that they will count it as a vote, okay? Because that's what happens, all right? You message the minister of justice about a thing you're concerned about, and you CC in the other MPs that are related to that topic, or whoever's the cabinet minister for that, and they just count it as a vote for or against something. I don't even know if they read them, and that's what makes me angry. You have these committees where their whole job is dedicated to one thing, removing barriers, and the only way you can access it is by writing these fucking 10-page briefs with, like, a specific academic structure that, like, is so inaccessible. Because if you think about it, disabled people have harder challenges accessing education in the first place. So you're asking them to do something in a specific format they may not easily be able to do, probably with software that isn't super friendly for whatever fucking fax machines the government thought was a good idea to keep using. And then you say, oh, well, I don't actually want to read your brief because you didn't put research links in because your personal experience just doesn't count. Sorry, we're not looking for that kind of information. That's insane. That's like, what is even the point of trying? It was kind of demoralizing, you know, like all the different things I have tried doing to, like, be more active and participate in politics and the government and knowing what's going on in the world. Because it's like, why? Okay, like petitions, our Commons has these petitions, and honestly, it has made me the happiest I've ever been. Because basically what it is there's a ton of petitions that people have put up, and they're generally by private citizens who then have an MP person, like, approve it for them. So there are MPs that back the petition. And there are a lot of really good, smart ideas on there. There was one for implementing a silver alert so that old people who have dementia and stuff, if they get lost, we have basically an Amber Alert system for them specifically so that we can find our grandmas before they die in the wintertime. I think that's beautiful. That's a great idea. And honestly, that's the way it should be, because it only takes like 500 signatures for any of these petitions to make it to the House of Commons. As long as there's 500, as long as it's like something that the clerk will sign off of, that there was enough support, they have to read it. The House of Commons has to read it. And that is the most accessible way of interacting with the Canadian government I have seen. Additionally, contacting your MLAs. MLAs, honestly, awesome, fantastic people. My local lady, Sarah Melligy, she's honestly a gem. She was so informative about all the, like, weird fucking questions I sent her. I sent her, like, a crazy long email, and she responded to everything with, like, real information. I learned how we figure out what a drought is considered. So I was very thankful for that. But there's also just, like, a terrible lack of information on these things. So with the petition thing, the only reason I found out about it because I read that John Barlow pamphlet, and he mentioned a couple petitions that he had. And then I'm looking at the petitions, and there's so many weird fucking petitions for this one conservative lady, Kathy Wagentail? I think she's from Edmonton. Anyways, all her fucking petitions that she backs are like, we're concerned about trans medical things for children. And, like, that on its own, I understand why that's a petition. I understand why they're popular. But there's so many of them. Like, she keeps backing more and more petitions every time it goes to the House, and they don't do a thing she wants. This same thing with, like, I'm concerned about the rights of pregnant women. And every time these petitions go to the House of Commons, they're like, well, we can't do that because if we put this specific protection you're asking for, it would impact women's rights in a way that could be very negative for other things, i.e. abortion. We've already seen how bad that is in America. And she keeps fucking doing it. It's like all the same shit, and it's all, like, really weird because it's all stuff where, like, if you just sort of read it on the surface, it's probably fine, you know? Of course we would want to be concerned about protecting pregnant women, but the language of it introduced in a legal setting would almost always lead to disaster. It drives me nuts. But all her petitions are so popular because she promotes them, and that is one of the things that bothers me. There are a lot of really smart petitions from private citizens, but because the MPs that back them aren't, like, promoting them because they don't have an agenda, and the private citizens are just putting the petitions out there on the internet, nobody's reading them, nobody's backing them, and I find that terribly sad. And that's kind of the thing I've been thinking about a lot, is that I've heard all kinds of broad, abstract, academic things that we should or shouldn't be doing. Every single thing I've seen that was actually beneficial for my life was public infrastructure and collective action. Those two things have been the most beneficial for me, my family, friends, and it is also something that literally anybody can do. It took me a long time to realize people have so much more power in certain ways than they realize, and that's the unfortunate part. We feel like, oh, we have to do it this specific way because someone told us to, and honestly, it doesn't usually work very well. You should still vote. You should still sign petitions. I think petitions are honestly maybe one of the most efficient, lazy ways to be active. But there's so much other shit you can do that I feel like we don't think about. Like, for example, something as simple as, like, if you see someone you know who, like, they work all the time, they're crazy tired, and they really, really need help with something, like signing a form or applying for a benefits or something like that. You could be that person who's like, hey, I'm comfortable doing some paperwork. Let me help you with that. Hey, I could ask that guy at that store if they're still hiring and see what information I need to get your resume in there. Those are simple things that really make a difference. And it's hard though, because it's hard to know what you can do and what you would be good at. I don't have a lot of money. I've never had a lot of money. So I look at charity things that I used to be able to do when I lived in a middle-class family, like food hampers or doing food drives. I've done a lot of different charity type things when I was a teenager, partly because that was encouraged by my school and partly because it was just something we did. Now that I'm older, it's actually really hard. Right? You individually as a person probably don't have a lot of resources to be donating money all over the place. You probably need that for the crazy high groceries at the Loblaw store. There are things I really want to do. I've gone through all my old clothes and I'm going to find people who want them. And one of the things I found that I absolutely love, there's a store in Calgary that I haven't had a chance to go to, but essentially what it is, a thrift store that's a pay what you want thrift store, which is very, very rare. So basically what they do is they take donations for clothing. I think it's called Good Neighbor. They then allow people to pay whatever they can afford for the clothing in the store. And the best part is they do not require any like income statements for you to be able to shop there, which is really important. Because one of the things I think people don't realize about accessing public services is that there is such a thing as invisible poverty. And I have been there many, many times in my life. And the one thing I think that separates out people that are invisibly poor, pride. I never wanted anybody to know that I was struggling. It was always very hard. So if I had to go into a place and try to prove that I was poor enough to be there, I would just not go. I would rather just not have winter gear because that would be hard for me. I would be embarrassed. And I think that's something people don't realize is that a lot of people want to keep their dignity. And most of the kinds of charity that we offer do not do that. I used to do a lot of charity through my school, but a lot of it was Christian church-based stuff. And that put me in a really awkward spot because as an atheist, I did not feel comfortable evangelizing people, especially when you're doing it while handing them shit that they need. Like, it feels very wrong to look at someone who literally has no option but to take a pack of menstrual pads from you and say, hey, you should come to church, because you're kind of taking advantage of the concept of reciprocity and like making them feel bad that they need to do something. So either they have to be a jerk and tell you no, and then you're gonna be like, oh, how come these homeless people aren't more grateful to me? Which is something I've seen. This one time my family, we did this thing where we made a shit ton of sandwiches and then we went out into Calgary and we were handing them out. And the interesting thing is none of the homeless people would take the food from us. And my parents were like offended. They were so upset. They were like, oh, how dare these people not take our sandwiches? It wasn't until I was older that I learned a lot of people are terrible to homeless people. They will do shit like put dog poop in food and give it to homeless people. Or do things like, oh, here's a cookie and it's actually filled with toothpaste, because they just want to make them sad and miserable. And then when you think about the fact that most homeless people are not allowed into public bathrooms, that's like they just have to sit there. They just have to sit there with a dog poop sandwich all day, maybe multiple days. And how shitty that has to be. And I'm like, yeah, no shit, they didn't want a sandwich. You can't trust where the food came from if it's not packaged, right? I understand now why a homeless man would wait outside this one McDonald's that we used to go to. And he kind of like ambushed me at the door and was like, please, can I have McDonald's? And I was like, you know what? I have $15, I think. I think I can make this work. And the person I was with was very upset. They were like, that was rude of him. And I was like, no, I get it. I understand. McDonald's food, it's prepared in front of you. You know it's safe to eat. It's relatively cheap, has a lot of calories because it's not very healthy for you. And I feel like maybe sometimes you have to be aggressive. I get that. I understand this as a concept. But yeah, I think like it's hard. It's hard to individually pull people out when you yourself are struggling. And the one thing I always have really, really wanted, and I think it's sort of maybe why people are attracted to the idea of like winning the lottery or being a millionaire or being a CEO of Facebook, is that if you ever did have the capital individually to do whatever you wanted. You would not only be able to lift yourself up, you'd be able to lift up your family, you'd be able to lift up your friends. And I think that's where nepotism comes from, honestly. It's kind of weird. I went from being like super, super dirt poor, middle class. And then at a certain point, I ended up meeting this one family who's helped me a lot. And they're like very wealthy, like ungodly amounts of wealth. And I feel bad about it because on the one hand, I see shit that I'm like, oh my God, this is so problematic. But like, I understand why nepotism exists now, because really it is just helping your friends and family, which is what everybody wants to do. But most of us do not have the capital or the opportunity to do so. So the one thing I've been like obsessed with is collective action, which is basically this idea that you as an individual might not have a lot, right? You might have an extra winter jacket. You might have the ability to mass make some lunch food or whatever. You might be really good at paperwork. And those things on their own maybe really just help you, maybe just help like a family member. But if you were able to pool your resources with other people, you could do a lot more. We're so disconnected that it's hard. It's really hard to make friends. It's especially like if you're in college or whatever, it's hard to make friends and to make those connections. But if you can do it, having like a little family you can build from is a really, really big deal. You know, something as simple as like when I was at SAIT, they had this thing as a food box program. You paid $25. What they did is they got a bunch of random produce from farmers in the area at a discount. Usually not like super nice looking because the farmers still sold to markets, but all quality fresh food. And they just put a bunch of random shit and tried to make it sort of even in all the boxes. So I'd come home with a cardboard box with like bananas and a melon and like a shit ton of potatoes and maybe a beet or some kind of squash I'd never seen in my entire life before. And I'd look at all the food and I'd be like, what can I do with this? And then what I started doing is my boyfriend, he would come over. We would just make food together. We'd make tons and tons of meals together because that $25 split between the two of us was actually much more affordable and accessible than it was for me personally just on what I made. I have a friend who, for Thanksgiving this year, he and some of his friends got together and they all did sort of like a potluck. And I never used to understand potlucks as a concept, but I get it now. You as a person individually might not have a lot of money to get a lot of food together, but if you and a bunch of other people get together and you all have a little bit of food, it multiplies very quickly, which is very interesting. There's so many things like that. I see so many great examples where people got together and they did something as a community that was very helpful when the fucking people that are supposed to be taking care of them, the government, the politicians, the people that we look to and are like, hey, please fix my problem, we're not fucking doing it. I've seen people who do community refrigerators where essentially they set up a refrigerator somewhere and people put little like extra homemade meals and they put the expiration date so people know if they're still good and people can just take the food home with them. So if you have leftovers one day, maybe someone gets a free lunch. Yeah, I don't know. I'm still putting the ideas together in my head, but I think a lot about how all of our greatest economic booms in history, America, Canada, Britain, all of them were after huge investments in public infrastructure. All of it was because you put money in infrastructure, creates jobs, then those jobs help pay the people, then those people go out, they buy things, that creates more work, more jobs, more commerce. But we're not doing that. We're not putting money into public infrastructure. We're saving that as far down the road as we can, cutting all of those things, and just saying, I don't know, let's hope corporations fix it. Let's hope Loblaws is benevolent this year. And I think if the government isn't gonna fucking do it, why can't you do it? Why can't you look at your town and be like, oh, there is no Wi-Fi here. Perhaps I could find a way to get the people that live here to pool our resources together to have a public Wi-Fi spot. Or maybe we have a satellite library, but it's not used very often. Maybe I can get a library card and start using the library. Maybe I can donate an extra tool or something I have at the library that people can just borrow. They can just borrow my chainsaw or my whatever. If you want more context on that, John Oliver did a really good video on how libraries are kind of like changing and adapting to new things, like how they rent stuff out. It's very good. Why is that something that we look at ourselves when we say, I don't have the power to do that? I can't. I know personally for me, it's because you're tired all the time. I've been working so hard since I was like 13. And I've never made a lot of money. And as soon as I made money, there were expenses. There was band tours I had to pay for. There was field trips for my siblings. Like my only sort of saving grace was that most of my school was paid for through a bursary because I was in foster care for so long. So I tried to save up all the money I could to send my siblings to college. And then COVID happened and I lost my job and I had to dip into it. And now neither of my siblings even went to college. I had this dream for them that they were going to grow up and they were going to do all these wonderful things and they were going to have all these opportunities that I didn't get, and somebody fucked it over for them. And That makes me really mad. If I had more power as an individual, there are so many things I would want to do. And the one thing I've been thinking about so much is like, what can I do as an individual? What can I do to help people that actually is valuable? Maybe it's donating to Jacket Racket so that kids in school can have winter gear, because I went to so many schools where kids did not have proper winter gear because they were just too poor to afford it. But like a lot of their families wouldn't accept any kind of charity, any kind of handouts if it was a public thing. It's hard to put it all into words what I'm trying to explain, but basically, if the people that are supposed to take care of us will not invest in public infrastructure, why can't we invest in ourselves and our community? Even if it's something very small, like a community garden, or just composting a little bit, or I don't know. I think it depends on what you're good at and what you have time for, because most people don't have a lot of time or a lot of money to do things. But if you can find something simple you can do, that could be huge. I had this really weird experience while I was collecting together all the old clothes I don't wear because I don't like them. I've started just re-sewing the clothes that I do like. There are certain things of clothing that I just repatch them over and over again. And then there are certain kinds of clothing that are very nice, high-end things I received as gifts from people with a lot more money than me. And I just don't like them. They're just not for me. They make me feel weird. They bring out weird gender dysphoria things. And I think these would be really nice. If when I was in college and I couldn't afford clothes for the office, I got a receptionist job, and my boss is like, hey, you need to have a professional wardrobe because it's a requirement for the office setting. And I broke down in tears. I did not have the money, and I really, really needed this job. And I was like, there's no way I can afford this. I just don't make enough. Is it possible I could get like an advance or something? And my boss, who was someone I knew, said, you know what? I will get the clothes for you. It's all right. I would like you to work here. I will get the clothes. And that was really helpful for me. When I was going through thrift stores, almost everything you find in a secondhand store is shit that people not only didn't want, but like also decided was so garbage they couldn't resell it. You know, if you have a nice piece of clothing, you almost always try to resell it because you want the money. And I get that. There's certain things that I'm trying to flip right now for money because I'm poor. But I think I would like to give those nicer clothes away to a thrift store, especially one where it's not really a charity, it's a pay as you can, because I think that encourages a certain level of dignity and responsibility that you don't necessarily get from like fully free handout things. I think it's a very happy middle ground to allow people to still sort of participate in an economy, sort of contribute, even if it's not a lot. So I think, yeah, why can't somebody have this nice sweater? But then when I started doing that, someone I knew was like, oh, no, I'll take those. I'll just resell them. And I was like, why would you do that? Why is it so important that poor people do not have nice high-end things when you don't want them? Why do we save the most garbage, shittiest things for the poorest people when it's a really simple thing that could really help someone? You know, if someone shows up at a job interview and they didn't have money for shampoo, or they didn't have money for the nicest clothes, or you can tell they're in a cheap suit because that was all they could afford, some hiring managers will look at them and go, I see you have these qualifications, I see you have these things, but I don't know. I just don't feel like you're the right person for this office culture. And it's not even necessarily that they're doing it on purpose. I don't think a lot of people look at poor people and they're like, no, you can't do this. But when you're looking at working poor people, there's a very clear separation, I think, between how easy it is to network, because sort of like in the back of people's brains, I think they pick up on it still, and it sort of weeds you out in a way that's really hard to describe unless you've ever had it happen to you. So I think you giving people something like actually some nice clothes when they don't have a lot of money could be huge for helping them get a job. It could be huge for just making them carry themselves with a little more confidence, giving them the ability to sort of pay a little bit of money towards stuff that they really, really need. Could help be the difference between not accessing any resources at all and having something that they need. It's hard though, because like I live in a small town right now. It's also a very bougie town. It's like everyone is crazy rich. And it's hard to find stuff like that I can do in this town that would be helpful. I think in Calgary, weirdly, there were a lot more opportunities to contribute a little bit more, and it's something that I think is hard to find, but I don't know, I've just been thinking about it a lot because I'm so tired of not doing anything, and I really want to be the kind of person that does things, because I look at history and I look at all these different wonderful community actions that people have taken, especially anarchists. I don't know what it is. Anarchists are just the coolest fucking people. I look at all the shit that they do to like help each other be self-sufficient and to support each other and to fill in the gaps. It's just like the government and corporations and stuff, they just can't be innovative enough. They're just not capable of it. I think there's something about that separation between people in an organization that makes it really hard to actually know what people need and how to make it happen in a way that's innovative and efficient and practical. because you're just not there. Yeah, I look at all that stuff and I think none of this, most of the things we have that are good. And when I was thinking about the unions thing, tradespeople, I recently learned that many trades, part of the reason that tradespeople make good money and aren't crazy in debt is because a lot of them have paid for apprenticeships, which is not something you see in other industries. Like marketing, it's pretty commonly accepted that you will do an unpaid internship, which is insanely exclusive to people who are poor and who don't have the money to just not work. So what you have to do is you either have to work through your entire internship, a second job, so you're probably not going to perform as well, or you just can't do the internship, and that's your obstacle. So I think like tradespeople, they have divided themselves out as valuable, you know, like their skill set, they treat themselves as valuable enough. They have the kinds of associations where they can advocate for themselves in a way that unions have just not been able to because of how much we've weakened them. These trade organizations, they are what unions should have been in a lot of ways, because tradespeople actually get shit like paid for internships. They have like these actual networking pipelines to be able to get into jobs. They make good money. They have actual safety standards. Hard work, it's hard jobs. It's not easy on your body, but they have a lot more going for them than all the other industries that have unions, because I don't know. People looked at unions and were like, you know what? We don't need this. It's garbage. Who would want one? We'll just repeatedly make them weaker and weaker so that they can't negotiate, and that'll probably be fine. That'll probably be fine for all the people in those industries. They'll do great. They won't need any help. Imagine what the world would be like if we treated more groups of people that way, like they were actually valuable, like their skills mattered to us. If we treated people like they were an investment. Like I run a small business for like 5 years. I don't make very much money. Honestly, I'm kind of garbage at it. Part of that is because I want to pay people fairly. So when I have someone who does like development work for me, I don't hire them for the job unless I know I can pay them. And then I pay them like $30 an hour because that's what they deserve for their skills and the work that they're doing. And it's not very popular because it cuts into your bottom line. But I see it as an investment, because if I pay the people well who come and work for me, I know that if I ask them to work for me again, they would come back. And I know that having the same person repeatedly do work for me improves their skills and makes them more efficient at doing things that I need them to do. And I don't know, I just wish I saw it more. Like the retail store I work at right now as my day job, my boss is the nicest boss I've ever had in my entire life. He never gets mad if you have to take time off. He's very considerate. There have been multiple times where I've been sick because of my NMO, and he's never mad at me. He's just like worried that I'm okay. I have never been more loyal. Okay, I would die for this man. I would walk over fire and burning glass if it meant helping the store, okay? I talk up the store all the time and how great it is and all the things in there. But it's mostly because he is a wonderful person who is kind to his staff. He's reasonable. He lets us sit down, which sounds ridiculous, but I've worked in so many retail places where they're like, no, you can't sit down. I worked at a Canadian Tire store where I literally started puking because I have like intense period pain sometimes and it makes me really, really sick. And they were like, oh, can you just stay? Can you just stay like 2 more hours? Because your shift's not like really over yet. And I'm literally standing next to the garbage can I just puked in front of them. And they were like mad that I puked because they were like, oh, I guess I have to send you home now. Even if I don't necessarily need an extra shift because I'm not like that tight on money for that specific week, I still take the extra shift. I will come in early, I will come in late, I will come in all kinds of weird times for this man. I will subtly and not so subtly put up propaganda for the store until the day I die. And I think that's something that hiring people, and especially corporations and stuff, just don't understand anymore. They do not understand how to invest in people and to build loyalty, because it just doesn't exist. You know, it's like a meat grinder establishment where it's just, I don't know, you can always get a new one. Broke your printer, just get a new one. It's much cheaper. And I think that's sad. I think that's sad that so many workers and people have just been reduced to like the value of an HP printer, where we're like, nah, it'd be too expensive to get an ink cartridge into the printer we already have. Let's just throw it out. It doesn't matter. It's not worth it. So lots of stuff like that. And I think like if a lot of the companies you're working for aren't going to take care of you, if the people that you put in place to represent you aren't going to take care of you because they care more about what a lobbyist or a super PAC wants to do, that only leaves you, right? That only leaves you, which is so much responsibility and heaviness by yourself, right? I'm not saying you as an individual need to go out into the streets and riot and burn buildings and cause a lot of chaos or whatever. I'm saying like you as an individual need friends, you know, like, and that's hard to do. I feel like it's really hard to make friends because everyone's kind of mean and bitchy and suspicious of each other now because we've got all this crazy shit going on. Networking, making friends, building family, These are important things. Coming up with ways where like you can all help each other benefit. I've seen all kinds of interesting things that used to be popular that aren't anymore, like money pools. Okay, there's this thing, and it sounds a bit like a Ponzi scheme, which is interesting. But basically what people would do is they'd have like a community pool essentially where everyone would contribute like, I don't know, $30 every month. And then when there was like an important purchase that someone needed to make, like, oh, my kid really needs an oboe for a band class, or oh, my son really needs this, and the people were all collectively too poor to get a loan, the person would be like, sure, I'll take it out of the money pool, I'll write you down, and the next time it'll be someone else's turn. And it's like a very primitive thing. It's probably not very efficient, but that's what people had to do when they couldn't access loans or get good credit from a bank because they just didn't have enough money to be the kind of people that a bank would look at and help. I've come to really appreciate that there are so many little ways that everybody can help each other when you pool your resources. And we don't even think about it anymore because we're so used to relying on somebody else and just like hoping for benevolence. You know, I feel like most people in the world are Oliver Twist right now with the little bowl being like, please, give me some soup. And that sucks ass. I feel like it takes away a lot of your autonomy and your dignity and your pride to always have to rely on somebody else to consider you, to consider your thoughts, when what you could really do is be helping each other. I'm sure there are ways that if you thought about stuff that you need, stuff that other people have, stuff that you guys could trade around or move sort of collectively, you could do it. You know, maybe you are not a good sewer, but maybe you have a friend that is a good sewer and you're like, hey, I have one pair of jeans and there's holes in it and I really need them to not be broken. Could you sew these? I will give you all of my weird fabric scraps and extra t-shirts I don't want. But if you could take those fabric scraps and make them into this thing I need, I would really appreciate it. Okay? And then you've created sort of like a situation where that friend can contribute something as a job and you can get something that you really need. And you're both being eco-friendly and pragmatic. Lots of stuff like that. Maybe there's someone you know who is like actually good with tools. And you're like, hey, my bookcase is really broken. I don't have money for a new one. And it's really dangerous. It keeps falling over. Do you think you could figure that out? And they can go, I could maybe do that, you know? Or maybe encouraging your friends with skills they would like to do, but don't do. I feel like it's such a shame that so many people say, oh, I'd love to work in the movies. I'd love to write a book. I'd love to write blog posts, or I bet I could do a better job than this guy. But you just never have the time. You never have the energy. And if you look at someone like that you know that you care about, and you're like, hey, you keep saying you want to write a book. I know you haven't gotten there yet. What if I helped? You know, what if I found a tool that can make it easier for you to do it? What if I helped out with some of the things that take up the time for you to do that skill, go to school, do that course? Those are all very valuable things, and I feel like we underappreciate them. I don't really know what this video is about. I'll figure it out later, but I don't know. It's just a lot of stuff I've been thinking about is this idea of wanting to be a person who does stuff as opposed to a person who watches stuff or reads stuff or worries about stuff. Some of my anxiety around political things has gone down because I've realized that there are certain things that are really out of my control outside of an election. Like whatever the fuck the Conservative Party is going to do when they get in Canada, or whatever the fuck the Liberal government has decided they're doing, or whatever the fuck the NDP government is doing. Because it's like outside of voting them in or out, I really have no power over what they choose to do. I can send them letters, I can send them things. The best I can do is petitions or protests or whatever that is, and I'm too tired. I'm too tired and poor to do more than sign many petitions about cool shit. But yeah, maybe there are things I can do at home, in my community, with my family, with my friends. I've seen so many really smart niche business concepts and niche projects and niche public infrastructure ideas or art things, but those people had to decide to be the kind of person who does things. The people who said, hey, City of Calgary, I'd like an arts and culture grant to start this market in my town, which then allowed them to bring business into the town that then helped everybody in that area. Those people had to decide to do that. They had to decide to be the kind of people that were gonna do something. The people that donated resources to the public library that could then be used and borrowed by people who really needed them, those people had to decide to do that. They had to decide to be the kind of person who does. I don't know, if you've ever wanted to be the kind of person who does things, it's hard and it takes a lot of work, and I'm still figuring out exactly how you do that efficiently and effectively because There aren't a lot of guides on it, you know, like praxis guides and stuff on Reddit has some good things, but they're mostly geared towards like hardcore anarchy, which isn't super helpful at this junction. I don't think I'm there yet, you know? And I don't know if you've ever thought about being a person who does, but if you are, this video is for you. And if you just wanted to hear gossip about Canada politics, you got a little bit of that too. So that was the video. I'm gonna try to go to bed now.